Hands were shaking when I read my brother's text. I was already in my car, already pulling out of the parking garage, already telling myself to just breathe. The message was 3 words. Mom wants you. Of course she did. Only when something was wrong. Only when she needed something. Never just because. I sat there with the engine running and the heat on low, and I thought about turning around and going back up to my apartment. I thought about it seriously, the way you think about jumping off a high dive, knowing you probably won't, but needing a moment to decide. Then I put the car in drive and headed to their house. The same house I grew up in, the same house where I'd spent years feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Let me back up. I'm the older one. By 4 years. My brother Theo came along when I was 4, and somewhere in the years that followed, my parents divided themselves between us. Not evenly, not fairly, but completely. Theo got the bigger bedroom. Theo got the newer bike. Theo got the car on his 16th birthday while I took the bus to my part-time job. I told myself it was a boy thing, a youngest child thing, a coincidence thing. I was very good at explaining things away. Growing up, I watched my parents pour themselves into my brother the way you water a plant you're convinced is rare and fragile. Every school play he was in, they were front row. Every basketball game, they drove an hour each way. When he got a C in chemistry, my dad hired a private tutor. When I failed my driving test the first time, not even a class, just the test, my mom shrugged and said, "You'll get it next time." I didn't ask for much. I want to be clear about that. I didn't throw tantrums or demand equity. I did my homework at the kitchen table while they watched his games on TV. I made my own doctor's appointments starting at 15 because my mom kept forgetting. I learned to be small, to take up less room, to need less oxygen. What I wanted, more than anything, was just to be seen. I was a good student, not exceptional. I didn't have the luxury of tutors or extra help, but I worked hard. I got into a state school on a partial academic scholarship. I remember coming home with a letter, my hands nervous and happy at the same time. That particular feeling of having done something good almost entirely on your own. My parents were at the dining room table. My mom was helping Theo with the science project. My dad was reading on his tablet. I stood in the doorway and said I got in. My mom looked up. She said, "That's great, honey," and looked back down at the poster board. That was it. 3 weeks later, when Theo made the varsity soccer team as a freshman, an actual achievement, I'm not dismissing it, there was a dinner, not a restaurant, an actual dinner party. My mom cooked for 2 days. My dad invited his brother and sister-in-law. There were balloons. There was a cake with a soccer ball on it. I ate my slice and smiled and told Bio congratulations and went to bed and cried into my pillow until I was too tired to cry anymore. College was the first time I felt like I could breathe. I got a job waitressing, then a second job at the campus bookstore, and I paid the difference my scholarship didn't cover. I called home maybe once a week out of obligation. The calls were short. My mom would tell me what Theo was doing. My dad would ask if I needed money, and when I said no, he'd sound relieved. I stopped sharing things about my own life somewhere around my sophomore year. It didn't seem to matter anyway. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in healthcare administration. I got a job at a regional hospital network doing billing and compliance work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it paid decently, and I was good at it. I moved into my own apartment 20 minutes from my parents' house because that's where the job was, and I told myself the proximity was just geography. I started dating someone named Will, my second year out of school. He was an electrician, steady and quiet and kind. The kind of person who remembered small things. What coffee you liked, what movie you'd mention wanting to see. We dated for 3 years. We got engaged. We planned a small wedding, just family and close friends, at a venue about 40 minutes outside of the city. My parents said they'd contribute. My mom specifically said, "We want to help. We're your parents." We agreed on a number, not huge, but meaningful, about $4,000, which for us at the time would cover the catering deposit and flowers. I planned around it. I counted on it. 3 months before the wedding, my dad told me they were giving Theo the money instead. He'd gotten into a coding boot camp and needed first and last month's rent for a new apartment. My dad said it with complete sincerity, like this was a reasonable thing to say, like rerouting my wedding money to my brother's rent was simply a matter of logistics. "You and Will both work," my dad said. "You'll figure it out. Theo's getting his footing." I stood in their kitchen and I felt something go very still inside me. Not anger, not yet. More like the moment before a storm when the air pressure drops and everything gets quiet. I said okay and I drove home and I sat on my kitchen floor and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a teenager. Then I called Will and he came over and we sat together and figured out how to make up the difference ourselves. We pulled from savings, we cut the guest list. We found a less expensive florist. We made it work because that is what I had always done, made it work. The wedding was beautiful. My parents attended. My mom cried. She told me I looked stunning. She danced at the reception and took photos on her phone and posted them online with the caption, "So proud of our daughter." And I smiled and I hugged her and I swallowed the fact that her pride had cost her exactly nothing because she'd contributed exactly nothing. Theo gave a toast. He talked about me like he knew me, like we had grown up close, like he had any idea who I actually was. He teared up a little at the end. Everyone thought it was touching. After the wedding, Will and I settled into our life. We bought a small house, a starter home, 2 bedrooms, needed some work, but solid bones. We fixed it up slowly, weekends and evenings, Will doing the electrical and plumbing himself, me learning to tile and paint. It became ours in the real way, the way that takes effort. My relationship with my parents settled into a routine. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional Sunday dinner. I was pleasant. I kept things surface level. I had long since stopped expecting anything and had made peace, or something that looked like peace, with the way things were. Then came my dad's retirement party. He worked in logistics management for 30 years and his company threw him a party at a hotel ballroom downtown. It was a big deal to them, and I wanted to honor that, so Will and I got dressed up and brought a nice gift. A framed photo collage I'd put together myself from his career years, something personal and time-consuming. At some point during the evening, my dad stood up to give a speech. He talked about his career, his colleagues, his life. Then he talked about family. He talked about my mom, sweet and expected. Then he talked about Theo, my brother, his son, his pride, the one who had followed his dad's work ethic and entrepreneurial spirit. He talked about Theo for almost 2 minutes. He mentioned me in one sentence. And my daughter, who's doing well? That's it. Doing well. Will put his hand on my knee under the table, and I kept my face very still and I clapped with everyone else when my dad raised his glass. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I'd run out of tears for this particular wound. I just felt very tired and very clear. I started pulling back after that. Not dramatically. I didn't send a manifesto or stage a confrontation. I just made myself less available. Fewer Sunday dinners, shorter calls. I stopped offering information about my life, stopped asking for their input, stopped performing the role of grateful daughter who just needs a little more time and patience. My parents didn't really notice at first. That said something, I think. When they did notice, my mom's first instinct was to attribute it to stress. "You work too hard," she said. "You should slow down." There was no curiosity about what I might actually be feeling. No question about whether she had done something. Just a gentle, automatic reframe that centered her comfort over my reality. The breaking point came about 2 years after the retirement party. Theo had been doing well with his tech work, and my parents decided to celebrate. They were throwing a party for him. Not a birthday, not a graduation, just a "we're proud of you" party. And they were inviting extended family and friends. The gift they announced at the party, a down payment on a condo, $40,000. I found out at the party. Not before, not privately, not with any acknowledgement that this might feel complicated for me. I found out when my aunt leaned over mid-dinner and said, "Isn't it wonderful what your parents are doing for Theo?" I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink with the water running, and I looked at my face in the mirror. I thought about the wedding money. I thought about my dad's speech. I thought about my mom saying, "You'll figure it out." I thought about the letter in the doorway and the science project poster board. I thought about my grandfather, my dad's dad, Grandpa Lou. He was there that night, seated next to my aunt. He was a quiet man, gentle in the way old men get when they've outlived most of their hard feelings. He had always been kind to me, the only one in the family who seemed to genuinely notice when I was struggling. He'd call me sometimes, out of the blue, just to check in. He'd slip me a little cash when I was in college, always in a card with a note that said, "Just because." I loved him. And Grandpa Lou was there that night, watching my parents hand my brother $40,000, and I knew he saw it for what it was. I'd watched his face during the announcement, a flicker of something, discomfort maybe, or sadness, but he'd clapped along with everyone else. He'd smiled. He hadn't said a word. That was the moment I understood something I'd been avoiding. Silence is a choice. Kindness without action is a comfortable position. I didn't blame Grandpa Lou the way I blamed my parents. The hurt was different, softer. But I understood that even the people who loved me quietly had decided their comfort mattered more than my dignity. I went back to the table. I finished dinner. I hugged my parents goodbye. I thanked them for the evening. I drove home with Will sitting beside me, and I didn't say anything for almost the whole drive, and he let me have that silence, because he knew me well enough to know I was somewhere else entirely. That night, I told him I'm done, not screaming, not crying, just a statement of fact, the way you say it's going to rain when you can see the clouds already forming. Will nodded. He said, okay. Whatever you need. We didn't send a letter. We didn't have a dramatic phone call. I simply stopped reaching out. No more initiating. If they called, I kept it short. When my mom asked why I seemed distant, I said, I'm fine, just busy. I watched how long it took them to realize something had genuinely shifted. It took 3 months before my mom called in a way that made it clear she knew something was wrong. She'd asked Theo, apparently, and Theo had told her he thought I seemed off at the party. Just like that. Off. Not hurt or blindsided or let down in the most fundamental way. Off. My mom asked me directly, are you upset about the condo? I said, I think I've been upset about a lot of things for a long time. I just need some space right now. She didn't ask what things. She said, I hope you feel better soon, and that was the end of it. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. I thought I'd miss them more. I thought the guilt would be louder. But mostly what I felt was this low-grade relief, the way you feel when you finally put down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you've forgotten it was optional. Will and I focused on our life. We fixed up the rest of the house. I got a promotion, director of compliance of the hospital, a title and a salary I'd worked toward for 3 years. We talked about starting a family. We went on a vacation, just the two of us, somewhere we'd always wanted to go but never let ourselves. We stopped putting our life on pause to perform for people who weren't paying attention anyway. Then, about 8 months after I'd truly stepped back, my dad called. His voice was different. Something tight in it. Careful. He asked how I was, and I said fine and waited. He said, we're in a bit of a situation. The house, we've had some expenses come up. I was wondering if you and Will might be able to. I let him finish. He was asking for a loan. Not a small one. He wanted $12,000. Something about the roof, a medical bill, some credit card debt. The details were vague in the way that details are when someone is embarrassed. I asked, have you talked to Theo? A pause. Theo just bought his condo. He doesn't have a lot of liquidity right now. Of course. I told my dad I would think about it and call him back. I hung up and I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and I thought about every version of how this conversation could go. I thought about the $4,000, the $40,000, the speech at the retirement party, the science project poster board, the letter in the doorway. I thought about what I wanted my life to feel like. I called my dad back the next day. I told him I wasn't able to help financially. I told him I was sorry they were going through a hard time. I kept my voice even because this wasn't about anger anymore. I'd moved past the anger a long time ago. This was just a boundary, clean and clear. My dad's voice got stiff. He said I didn't think you'd say no to your own parents. He said family takes care of each other. I said I've been taking care of myself since I was 15. I learned that from you. He didn't have anything to say to that. We hung up and I went and found Will in the garage, and I stood in the doorway and he looked up and something in my face must have told him because he just opened his arms and I walked in and stood there for a minute with my face against his shoulder. Then I went back inside and made dinner. My mom tried a different approach a few weeks later. She called on a Sunday morning and she was softer this time, more careful, leading with how much she missed me, how much they both missed me. She talked for a while about family, about how these things happen and nobody's perfect. She said, I don't know where it went wrong between us. I thought about saying I do. I thought about 30 years of specific evidence, but what I actually felt in that moment was just tired, not angry, not righteous, not even sad. Tired. The way you get tired of explaining something to someone who doesn't actually want to understand. I said, Mom, I love you, but I can't keep being in a relationship where I'm only visible when I'm needed. She got quiet. Then she said, I didn't know you felt that way. And there it was, the fundamental impossibility, the thing that could never be undone. I'd felt that way my entire life, and she hadn't known, which meant she hadn't been paying attention, which meant all the moments I'd needed her to see me and she hadn't. Those weren't accidents or oversights. They were just the shape of our relationship. I know you didn't, I said. And I meant it without bitterness, which surprised me. We ended the call without resolution. That was okay. I'd stopped needing resolution from them a long time ago. Grandpa Lou called a few weeks after that. He was 91, sharp but slow, and I could hear the careful way he chose his words. He said he'd heard from my dad that things were strained. He said he was sorry. He said, you deserved better than you got, from all of us. That one hit me in a different place. I had to wait a moment before I could answer. I told him I appreciated him saying that. I told him I didn't hold it against him, not really, but that I needed to live closer to what was true now and farther from what was comfortable. I told him I loved him. He said he loved me too. We talked for almost an hour after that. It was the longest we'd ever talked. He told me things about my father's childhood I hadn't known. Context that didn't excuse anything but made it smaller, more human. He told me he'd always thought I was remarkable and he'd never said it enough. I told him he could have, and he laughed a little, sad and real. He passed away 4 months later. I went to the funeral. I sat with my family and I held my grief separately from my anger. And it turned out those two things could exist in the same place without collapsing into each other. I was glad I'd had that last call with him. I was glad he'd said what he said. At the reception afterward, my mom found me standing by the window looking out at the yard. She stood next to me. We didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, he always loved you best, you know? He told me once. He said you were the one who reminded him of himself. I didn't know what to do with that. I stood there with it for a moment, this information that was 30 years too late and also, somehow, exactly enough. Thank you for telling me, I said. I drove home. Will was waiting. The house was warm and quiet and entirely ours. I thought about the version of me who used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while they watched Theo's highlights. That girl had needed so badly to be chosen. She'd tried so hard to earn something that was never going to be offered. She'd spent years making herself smaller and more convenient and more low maintenance, and it had never once changed anything. I thought about the condo, the wedding money, the retirement speech, the letter. I thought about what I'd built, the career, the house, the marriage, the life, with no safety net and no spotlight and nobody calling to say, that's the girl I know. I had done that. Entirely. And somewhere in the years between that kitchen table and this warm, quiet house, the meeting had just stopped. Not because I'd given up, but because I'd finally put my energy somewhere it could actually grow. I'd built a life that didn't require their approval to feel real. I'd stopped waiting to be seen by people who were always going to be looking somewhere else. That was the ending I hadn't expected. Not a confrontation, not a triumph, not a final scene where someone finally understood. Just a quiet day in my own house with my husband in the other room and a life that felt genuinely like mine. It turned out that was more than enough. It turned out it always had been. I just hadn't known it yet. The thing nobody tells you about being the self-sufficient one is that it becomes its own trap. People see you managing and they think, she's fine. She doesn't need us. And after a while, you start to believe it yourself. This story that you're fine, that needing less is the same as wanting less, that silence is the same as acceptance. I spent most of my life being fine. I paid my own tuition shortfall. I covered my own wedding when the money got redirected to Theo's rent. I filed my own paperwork, made my own appointments, built my own career without anyone watching. And every time I did those things without complaint, I was also teaching the people around me that I didn't require anything from them. I was very good at it. It cost me more than I knew. What I understand now is that what happened between me and my parents wasn't cruelty. Not exactly. It was something quieter and more ordinary than that. It was a failure of attention. And the hard truth about a failure of attention is that it can't be fixed retroactively. You can't go back and be seen in the moments that mattered. Those are just gone. What you can do is decide, going forward, where to put your energy and who deserves access to your life. That's what I did. Not in a dramatic way. Not with a speech or a letter or a final confrontation. I just stopped making myself available for relationships that only flowed in one direction. I stopped translating my worth into terms they might eventually accept. I stopped waiting. The harder lesson, the one that took longer, was about people like Grandpa Lou. He was gentle, and he loved me, and he never once said the wrong thing directly to my face. But he also never said the right thing at the right moment, in the room where it would have mattered, to the people who needed to hear it. Kindness that stays private isn't really kindness in the end. It's just comfort. His comfort, not mine. I had to grieve that separately from everything else, and I did. What got me through all of it wasn't anger, though I had plenty of that. What got me through was something simpler. I kept showing up for my own life. I kept doing the work, at my job, in my house, in my marriage with Will, even when it would have been easier to shrink or stall or wait for someone else to give me permission to move forward. That persistence, just continuing when there's no applause for it, is the thing that actually builds a life, not the moments when things go right. The ordinary days when you just keep going anyway. I think about that girl in the doorway with her acceptance letter sometimes. She deserved more than she got in that moment. But she also learned something from not getting it. She learned that her accomplishments were real, regardless of whether anyone acknowledged them. That knowledge is slow to arrive and impossible to take away once you have it. The $12,000 my dad asked for, I don't regret saying no. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because saying yes would have been dishonest. It would have meant pretending that the relationship was something it wasn't. I'd spent enough years doing that. At some point, honesty is the only thing left that's actually worth giving. I still think about what my mom told me at Grandpa Lou's funeral. That he always thought I reminded him of himself. I hold that carefully. It arrived too late to change anything, but it was real. And real things matter even when the timing is wrong. The life I have now, the house, the work, the marriage, the quiet, I made that. Every part of it. And that's not a sad ending. That's actually the whole point.